I'm not expecting violins here, but I am a human being as well as a politician. There is a much greater intensity, dare I say it, brutality to life as a politician than in years gone by.
Her departure a bombshell which exposed the SNP's lack of a succession plan before a divisive contest to replace her got underway.
And you can sit here and feel free to attack the SNP's record in the Queensferry crossing. I don't think it's going to do us any
I'm not
favours.
attacking the SNP's record.
You are. You're suggesting that it wasn't as successful.
No, I did not say that.
Hold on,
Don't put words in my mouth.
And why do you think I'm more trusted to tackle the cost of living crisis than you are?
And now a fresh controversy. A row over transparency has forced Sturgeon's husband to quit as the SNP's chief executive. The question many people are asking, though, is why did Nicola Sturgeon quit in the first place, and why now? Was it the failure to secure Scottish independence, lingering questions over party donations, or could recent setbacks be to blame, like the UK government blocking a controversial Scottish bill on gender recognition? Earlier, I sought some answers. First Minister, thank you for joining us today. And I want to talk to you about your decision to stand down, your reflections on your time as First Minister. But before I do, I want to ask you about the events of the weekend. Your husband, Peter Murrell, resigned this weekend as SNP Chief Exec. The Director of Comms also resigned after it emerged the party had lied to the press about membership numbers. To quote the interim Chief Exec, Michael Russell, the party's in a tremendous mess.
I don't think the party's in a tremendous mess, and I don't actually think that's what Mike meant. Some of the issues around the leadership election have, created this impression of it being messier than we would like it to be. But the process is fundamentally sound. The party is undefeated electorally. I'm struck by the fact most parties who go through a process like this do it after an election defeat. That's not the position the SNP is in. We're going through what I would describe as necessary growing pains. It is difficult, but I think we'll come out of it stronger. And perhaps the tricky thing, given we are undefeated electorally, still by some distance, Scotland's biggest political party, it's to get the balance right between the renewal, change, refresh that is necessary. I wouldn't be standing down if I didn't think that was necessary after 16 years in government, but also protecting the ingredients of our phenomenal electoral success, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So difficult process, yes, but a necessary one for the party to go through.
I'll come on to why you decided now, not after an election, which would be a more typical moment to stand down. But the fall in membership's really quite disastrous, isn't it?
No, it's not disastrous, and I think context and perspective is important. Of course, no party wants its membership to be going down rather than up, but immediately after the independence referendum, we had an explosion in membership to a very, very high point that was probably not sustainable forever. That has settled now around the place that's been published over the weekend. There'll be a variety of reasons in that. Some political, some people forget to sign up. The cost of living crisis will be a factor as well. But the perspective that is really important for my party to hold on to here is that we remain the only mass membership party in Scotland, and we can't say this with certainty because the other parties don't publish their membership figures, but based on the assessments of that, we will have more members in the SNP than all of the opposition parties in Scotland combined.
I don't want to dwell on it, but it is 30,000 members lost over a year. It is a lot,
sure,
and you're going through a bumpy time.
Sure.
The party not looking that attractive at the moment, but
So I'm not suggesting that this is not a difficult process, and at times it has been a less than edifying process. And what I'd say to all of those standing to succeed me as leader, I'm not picking a favourite there, that's for the party to decide, is remember that I am standing down from a party that hasn't lost an election in Scotland since 2010. We've won 8 elections in my 8 years as leader. We remain significantly ahead of all the other parties in the opinion polls, even opinion polls in recent days. We've built a coalition of support and an election-winning campaign machine. So yes, the fact I'm standing down is testament to the fact that I think after so long in government, this is a moment for refresh, renewal, change. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have the trust of the people of Scotland, and we've got to make sure we retain that trust.
Nicola Sturgeon, it sounds a bit like you're making a warning to them about trashing
I'm not
the
warning.
brand.
No, I'm not warning anybody. I'm going to be careful because I've said I'm not going to give unsolicited advice to those who come after me, and I mean that. But what I'm saying is most political parties go through this after the electorate have kicked them out. That's not the SNP's position. We are the most successful party in Scotland, the most trusted party, the biggest party, even in this difficult phase, by far. So we've obviously been doing lots of things right. Yes, we need to change. Any party that doesn't change after, you know, getting close to 2 decades in power is daft in my view. But make sure we get the balance right between change and protecting what has made us so successful.
And just before I move on, there's also an ongoing police investigation to use of funds. We wouldn't expect you to comment on that, but there's a suggestion you and your husband will be interviewed. Have you heard anything on that?
No, but I am not going to comment on... I wouldn't comment on any ongoing police investigation, and I'm not going to comment on this one.
So you haven't heard, but it must have been put pressure on you and your husband. Hand on heart, did this play any part in your departure and your decision?
No.
Well, look, let's move on to your resignation. You're standing down after nearly a decade as First Minister. This is the first time I've seen you do an interview since your shock resignation. And I have to say, I watched that resignation press conference somewhat aghast. You'd said you'd fight the next general election. You said it would be a de facto independence referendum. And then out of the blue, you quit.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, this is not directed at you, but Scottish journalists now describe my announcement as a shock and out of the blue. Many of them have spent the last couple of years speculating that I was about to do exactly that. So, you know, perhaps not quite as out the blue as many thought. Every time I've said that I'm going to fight the next election and carry on, I've meant it. But I became, I suppose, ever more conscious of the fact that every time I said it, I was having to work harder within myself to convince myself of that. I mean, to give some context, I've been First Minister for more than 8 years. I've been in government for 16 years, but I've been in politics for 30 years. I've done this for my entire adult life. Being First Minister, like being leader in any country, is 24/7. You're never off duty. There have been some really difficult periods over the last 8 years. The COVID experience was the most mentally and physically challenging I've ever gone through. So taking all of that, I just got to the point where I thought, could I soldier on for longer? Undoubtedly. Could I lead my party to more electoral success? I absolutely believe that. But could I, for much longer, give the job what it deserves? And the only way I could do it is 100% of myself. And the answer to that was no.
I mean, actually, Jacinda Ardern, who you have been compared to, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, said she didn't have enough in the tank. You said you didn't have the stamina. Is that how you felt? You just didn't have enough in you anymore?
I can only do this job, and I think anybody should only ever do a job like this if you can give it everything. And that's not just 100% of your work. A job like this, you give everything of yourself. You're never off duty. I'm not complaining about this. It's part and parcel of what the job is about. I can't just open my door and go for a walk with a friend of a Saturday morning. I can't go for a coffee. All the things people take for granted are not there for you. And I think there is only so long anybody can and should do that. So that's the personal reason. And traditionally in politics, maybe because it's tended to be more men than women doing it, there has been a tendency to cling on beyond the point you should step back. I prefer doing it this way, to step back maybe a bit before it was absolutely the point where everybody thought I should.
But arguably, Nicola Sturgeon, you stepping back now is leaving the party in a worse position than it would be for all of the difficulties you've had over the past 18 months. The party's going to be in a worse position for you stepping back.
I don't think that's...
It looks like a mess at the moment, I have to say.
We're going through a difficult period just now, but I believe we'll emerge stronger from that. For any political party, any organisation, you cannot be forever overly dependent on one individual. And that's part of we need to be able to move on. There's a wealth of talent in the SNP. We need to allow that to come forward. Part of the reason, going beyond my personal, and if I can't give it 100% personally, I'm not doing my party any favours by staying on longer. But one of the reasons beyond that for me stepping down is that because I've been around for so long, you become so dominant in the political discourse that you actually start to eclipse other people and the talent that is there. So is this difficult? And yes. Will we come through it? Yes. And in terms of where I leave my party, I am bequeathing to my successor a party that is undefeated electorally in my entire leadership, a party that remains the biggest in Scotland. That's a brilliant foundation for anybody on which to build.
And I listened carefully to what you said about how maybe male politicians in power cling on until they get shoved out, whereas you're leaving on your own terms when you have decided. But I'm curious still, was there a change in your personal life? Was there something that tipped you over the edge, or you just felt fatigue?
On the day I made the announcement, I think I spoke in Butte House for about 20 minutes. And in that speech are the reasons for the decision. And I know, there's always a temptation to look behind that and say there must be some hidden reason. There's not. I kind of poured my soul out that day. Partly it's personal. I joined the SNP at 16. I entered Parliament at 29. I became Deputy First Minister at 37. I'm about to be 53. I've been Nicola Sturgeon, the politician, for all of my life. I want to, in the next phase of my life, spend a bit more time on Nicola Sturgeon, the person, and contribute to the causes I care about in a different way. But for my party and the country, I also think after a certain period of time, change is healthy for any democracy. I sound as if I'm bigging myself up here. I'm not meaning to. I kind of dominate Scottish politics, which is not always healthy. It obscures and distorts debate on other issues. So this is the right time to go.
Can I put it another way if we go back to Ahern, because there are lots of parallels. Like you're a credible communicator, a formidable politician, and like her, you've left your party potentially in a worse shape going into a next general election than under your leadership. Your decision has genuinely surprised the party. Succession planning doesn't seem to be thought through. It's, could you argue, irresponsible? Because they're not ready to succeed you. There was a succession plan when you became First Minister.
Well, there wasn't a succession plan, there was me. And,
You were the succession plan.
But there is only so much. I've put people into my cabinets, into my government. I've allowed people to, get the ministerial experience and the political experience that comes with that. But ultimately, it comes down to people stepping up. And we've got 3 people who have stepped up and the party will choose. If you go back, to 10 years or so ago, people would have looked at me and thought, was she really capable? She'd never be Alex Salmond. She would never be able to. Sometimes you have to allow people to get into the position in order to prove themselves. And you become, and I felt I was becoming, not because I didn't want to do it and didn't try to do it, I was becoming the barrier to succession because I was eclipsing those that would come after me.
Couldn't you have stayed until the next general election?
Yeah, I could have done, but at what cost to myself? At what cost ultimately? Because if it is, and I don't believe it's the case, I think my party fundamentally is in a very strong position. But if your argument is correct and I would just have been staying on because I was effectively papering over cracks or keeping a lid on a pressure cooker or whatever, is that in the long-term interest of my party? My party is going through a process of change right now that is difficult. Change is always difficult, but it's essential if it is to come out of that process stronger and ready, not just to fight the next general election, but to fight the contests and win the case for independence that comes after that.
Is there any part of you, while you watch what's going on now and suddenly, Kate Forbes had to come back from maternity leave and there was a big scramble around and they didn't really have their campaigns ready. Is there any part of you that thinks, oh, maybe I mishandled this?
No, because
nothing at all?
Look, I'm my own biggest critic, OK? Even sitting in front of people like you. So I'm the kind of person that will always agonise over, could I have done that better, could I have done this better? But just let's play this thought experiment for 20 seconds here. Say I decided to stay on for another 6 months, year to the general election, whenever that was going to be. I I couldn't have said 6 months in advance, by the way, I'm about to stand down, because you can't govern like that. So whenever I had chosen to stand down, now 6 months, a year, 18 months from now, there would still have been a sense that it had come out of the blue, because the nature of it is that until you decide to step down, you are the person in the hot seat and you have to have all of the authority that goes with that. So what I'm saying in it, maybe I'm not trying to simply justify my own decision. I don't need to justify my own decision, but there's an inevitability after. The SNP has only 3 people lead it in 30 years. It hasn't had to go through this for a while. But frankly, every year now that this process was delayed would arguably have made the process harder than it is. We will emerge from this. It doesn't feel like it just now. I readily concede
going
that.
into a general election,
we will come out of this
to lose your most successful leader at the ballot box there's a downside risk, put it that way.
Look,
you must see that.
Of course, but there would be a downside risk of me staying on beyond the point at which I thought I was the right person, personally and politically. I spoke in my resignation speech about the fact that lots of people, because there's nobody in Scotland, very few people in Scotland without an opinion of me, good, bad, or somewhere in between. And that starts to colour people's opinions of other issues as well. In democracy, change is essential. In a healthy democracy, it is inevitable and inescapable. It's never easy, particularly when you've gone a long period without it. But I actually think in standing down now, rather than 6 months or a year from now, I'm giving my party the ability to go through this process, come out of it stronger and be fighting fit for the general election when it comes.
If your party lose loads of seats in the general election, will you look back on that and regret it?
Well, I don't believe my party will lose seats in the general election, and I will play my part, not as leader, but in different capacities, making sure my party fights the general election and fights it to win.
Okay, just a few more things. Now you're leaving the political fight, I do want to ask you about...
I'm not leaving politics, I'm leaving leadership.
the leadership fight then. I wanted to ask you about a piece of legislation that caused you some difficulty, which was the Gender Recognition Bill. You stuck to your guns, but it was a relatively marginal issue in relation to things like the NHS or education or drugs in Scotland, and you burnt through a huge amount of your own political capital, and you were out of step with the Scottish public. Do you look back on that and think you got it wrong?
Firstly, I think I could sit here and argue that I wasn't out of step with the Scottish public, but I don't know that there's much point in having it backwards and forwards about opinion polls.
Okay.
Secondly, the other thing I would take on is in leadership, you never do one issue at the expense of others. You deal with a multitude of issues. So this idea that because I pursued gender recognition legislation, we didn't focus on other issues. The other contextual point I would make is, and this actually illustrates the point I was making earlier on, this legislation is described in Scotland as my legislation. This piece of legislation was passed by a 2/3 majority in the Scottish Parliament. MSPs of every party voted for it. It wasn't my legislation, it was legislation backed democratically by the Scottish Parliament. If I have a regret about it, it's not pursuing an issue, because I don't think equality, basic human rights and human dignity is ever a marginal issue. I've sat in rooms with young trans kids talking to me about wanting to kill themselves because of the stigma and the discrimination and the inability to be recognised for who they are. I don't think that's a marginal issue. I'm a feminist, always have been, always will be. The threat to women are abusive and predatory men, not trans people. So I don't regret taking on that issue. Remember, Scotland was far from the first country to do this. Many other countries have similar legislation already in place. My regret is that I wasn't able to take the debate and the discourse around it into a more rational place. Not to get everybody to agree with me, that was never going to happen, but to help ensure that we could debate it reasonably, civilly and rationally. And maybe that's part of what I've been saying here. Maybe I've been in politics too long now to be able to do that as effectively as I need to.
Did it knock your confidence that you couldn't win the argument?
No, it didn't knock my confidence, but it wasn't. I said when I made my resignation statement, there was no one issue. I've dealt. People said at the time, "Well, this has been a tough time for the Scottish Government." Show me a time that's not been tough. If this was just about the confidence, the resilience to deal with individual ups and downs of politics, I wouldn't be standing down. But it's about that central point I made, when you've been in politics in as dominant a position as I have for as long as I have, then your ability to change people's minds about you and about issues that you're arguing diminishes. And that's the reality.
And First Minister, you also got into a muddle over Isla Bryson, a convicted rapist sent to a all-woman prison. You got into a muddle about whether they were a man or a woman. First you said you didn't have enough information, then you described Bryson as her. Do you regret all of that as well?
I don't. The Scottish Prison Service has been dealing with trans prisoners for years, and it's been dealing with trans prisoners safely and effectively. And so I don't regret, if I fail in any respect on any issue to communicate things as clearly and as properly as I can, then I always, regret the fact that I've done that. But, these are tough issues, but they are issues fundamentally about basic human rights. And my point on Isla Bryson...
women's rights.
I've campaigned for women's rights. I've fought for women's rights all my life and always will do. My point, and that it goes exactly to my point, there is no other group in society where we take the behaviour of a tiny minority and use it to deny rights to the whole of that group. The vast majority of trans women, the vast overwhelming majority of trans women never commit any crime against women or any other crime.
Absolutely.
A minority in every group will be bad faith actors that do terrible things. We deal with them, and that's the point I made about Isla Bryson. What gender that person said they were was less important than the fact they were a rapist, a convicted rapist, and that's how they're dealt with in the prison service. But the fact that they were a convicted rapist should not have been used by anybody as a pretext for denying rights to the broader trans community.
You, female leader, feminist, J.K.Rowling wore a T-shirt saying Nicola Sturgeon, destroyer of women's rights in 2022. Did that hurt?
No, because it's not true. And one of the things
So you were angry?
I wasn't angry. Look, things don't hurt you if they're fundamentally not true. I'm not going to... J.K. was a huge Harry Potter fan, still love Harry Potter. I'm not going to get into a spat with J.K. Rowling. I've got and she's entitled to her views. But I know where I stand on women's rights. I know what I've fought for and campaigned for all my life on women's rights. One other thing I would say here, and please, before I say it, it's not a comment directed at J.K. Rowling. Absolutely not. It's a general comment. But, one of the other things that, I've spoken about, lots of people speak about these days, is the abuse that women in public life get that is much more intense than at any time in my political career. An irony of the whole trans debate is, and I accept, the scrutiny, robust scrutiny that comes with the job that I do, but I've had more toxic abuse on this issue, much of it from women claiming to care about women's rights and women's safety, than I have from probably any other issue. And I think all of us need to take a step back and reflect on that. We can disagree, and obviously do disagree on this issue, but whether it's on this issue or other issues, we need to relearn how to disagree in a way that is civilised and respectful and brings a bit of good faith back into some of these debates.
Isn't it partly, though, because women feel that their rights are being ignored?
Look,
Isn't that why women are feeling angry about it?
Well, some women are feeling angry about it. Many, many women are not. I am a woman. Women's rights matter to me more than almost any other issue. I've grown up, like most women have, experiencing at different times in my life, the fear of being attacked by men. It is predatory men and that are abusive towards women. That's what we need to focus on. We also need to, in my view as a feminist, we need to focus much more on the real threats there are to women's rights around the world right now. Reproductive rights are under more attack than they have been in my life, probably. In many parts of the world, women still don't have basic human rights and dignity. Many girls still can't go to school. Misogyny, sexism, all again fueled largely by social media, on the rise. There are plenty real threats to women's rights and women's safety right now, and I think we should focus more on them rather than on things that perhaps are not the case.
So when Kate Forbes says that she would like protection zones around abortion clinics with balance, and we don't know what that means, does that worry you?
Look, I'm not going to make a comment on Kate, Humza, Ash, anything they're saying in the leadership election, because it's for my party to decide. On these issues, I'll speak for myself. We are seeing, and Scotland's not unique here, protests outside abortion clinics now that I think are wrong. It's not the protest that is wrong. People in a democracy have a right to protest, but come and protest outside a parliament where laws are made, not where women are accessing basic health care, which is what abortion services are. And I am a big supporter of effective buffer zones. Legislation has recently been passed in England for buffer zones. Northern Ireland have it. I want to see Scotland do the same, and I'll be an advocate for that from the backbenches.
I've got 2 more questions. We're totally out of time. This week, you've got your final First Minister's questions, your final
Yay.
cabinet. You're doing a big speech. You're doing a yay there. I was going to ask you, number one, it must feel weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been, since I made the announcement, I've been a mix of emotions. I don't mind saying that, and I'll be a mix of emotions this week as I go through these final acts, Cabinet, First Minister's questions. This is the biggest life change I've probably ever gone through. It's going to be a big transition, and I'm going to have to adapt, and it will take time. But in all of that mix of emotions in the last few weeks, I've never doubted that I'm doing the right thing, and that's in my core. I feel that in my gut.
Would you ever come back, or is this it? Are you ruling out a Nicola Sturgeon comeback?
There is not going to be a Nicola Sturgeon comeback.
There is not. I just want to ask you about your final act, one of your final acts as First Minister, because it was to announce the launch of a memorial book for those who have experienced pregnancy or baby loss. It's an experience that you went through in 2011 when serving as Deputy First Minister. It's particularly poignant today because it was Mother's Day yesterday, and you would have had a child that was in double digits now. It's something we don't talk about enough. Is that why you wanted to do that you wanted that to be part of your legacy, to try and allow women the space to talk about this publicly if they want to?
It's not just because I had that experience. Me having that experience has given me an understanding of why that's so important to women who go through early baby loss and miscarriage. So yes, I think it's important. I look back on my experience, and if there had been the ability to have the child that you hoped that pregnancy would become recognised, recorded in some way, I think that would have brought some comfort. And I do think it's important that we talk more openly about these experiences, miscarriage, menopause at another stage of life that women go through, but have been for so long clouded and shrouded in stigma and a bit of embarrassment. And I think we need to open all of that up to much greater discussion and embrace it. OK, well, Nicola Sturgeon, I don't know what you're going to do next. Me neither.
But we will all be watching to see,
you.
and thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate
your time. It's been a pleasure,
thank you.
thank you.
Nicola Sturgeon there with a poignant message and what's likely to be one of her final interviews as First Minister, and I wonder what she'll do next. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation. If you scan this QR code on screen now, you can watch all of our interviews online and all of the previous episodes of the show. And if you scan the QR code on screen right now, you can also listen to the Beth Rigby Interviews podcast. Each week I take a look at the highlights of my interviews, and there are some extra bits and pieces in there too. That'll be on the Sky News app or wherever you get your podcasts later this week. Well, that's all for today's show. Thank you to my special guest, Nicola Sturgeon, and thank you for watching.